So the second era of baseball card collecting of my life began in 1991. This happened because I was driving back from work on lunch breaks and I would pass a convenience store every day. And, I always had to stop and get a couple of Diet Dr. Peppers for the afternoon of my toiling at Alcatel in Claremont, North Carolina. Um, but I just started grabbing a pack of baseball cards every time I stopped. So it was sort of like being seven. I'd stop, I'd get a pack of cards. As the year went on, I'd get a pack of cards. It's like, crap, I've already got all these. But anyway, I finally, throughout the year, wound up getting the whole 1991 set. It was kind of fun. Every day I'd find one or two cards maybe that I hadn't had. So it was, sort of like being a kid again. But I wasn't seven anymore. I was able to drive. I could buy a pack a day. I had a pack a day habit at that time. So it was pretty cool. The regular baseball world was also interesting. So the Cubs in '89, like I said, had a fantastic season. Amazingly fun to watch. I moved to Hickory, North Carolina for the next baseball season. Couldn't get WGN anymore. Hickory, you killed me for so long. So I wound up being pretty much exclusively a Braves fan for a long time because I could get TBS at that time. So I was watching the Braves. 1991, another amazing season to watch baseball. Braves went from worst to first that year. And oddly enough, my first wife and I had tickets for the game where the Braves clinched. Fun part about that is we lived in Hickory. We had tickets. We were ready to go, maybe about noon, get packed up for the night game for the clincher. And my father-in-law at the time came by and said, hey, did you know they changed the time? They moved it up to an afternoon game. It's like, come on. So we go. By the time we got to Atlanta and got into the stadium, it was already the third inning. The Braves were already up 4-0. It's like, okay, fine. That's good. Sat down. Astros scored a couple of runs. It's like, so it's 4-2. It's getting a little bit tense. And for the first time of two occurrences, which is going to cause me to never be nice to my family at a baseball game again, my first wife says, not my wife yet, but at that time, says, hey, how about going and get some drinks for us? I was like, really? Now? She's like, yeah, now. So I go. Ron Gant, while I'm at the concession stand, hits the home run that puts the Braves over the top to win. Totally missed it. Not the last time this will happen. A little foreshadowing for you. Anyway, Braves won. Braves became a dynasty. Wonderful stuff to watch. What 1991 reminded me as a collector is when you're pack collecting, you get interesting little tidbits when Topps screws up. So I already talked about the Washington National Leaguers. I have the Jesus Alou with no position. I actually have a Carlos May card from 1971 that has no printing on the back. I've never seen any reference about that. I may have the only one in existence. I don't know. Carlos May, interesting guy in the Army Reserves in the Marine Reserves in 1969. He blew off his thumb, his right thumb. He played 8 major league seasons without a thumb. He went to the plate his first time in Comiskey Park, got a standing ovation. He cried at home plate. Pretty amazing stuff. All right, anyway, 1991. What did they do? Well, we've got Keith Comstock. I remember getting a pack and saying, awesome, Cubs have a new pitcher. They need a new pitcher, Keith Comstock. Yeah, guess what? He never pitched for the Cubs. He was actually a Mariner. So I think this is a semi-rare card from 91. Anyway, interesting story about Keith Comstock and his error cards. Apparently he had another error card a year or two before this. And the comment I saw on this was Keith Comstock has more error cards than he has quality games in the major leagues. Interesting stuff. The other one, a little more known, Wes Chamberlain. 2 different pictures. Pretty cool, huh? He bats right, throws right. Look at this. This picture, he's batting left. Guess why? That's not him. So they corrected the card eventually. Here's the actual Wes Chamberlain on an actual Wes Chamberlain card. He won't sign these, by the way. I did see a comment recently that someone actually mailed him this card, and apparently he wasn't paying attention and he signed it. So now he thinks he has a rarity of Wes Chamberlain actually signing the era card. Anyway, that is the start of era number 2. So it turned out the 90s were a very, very interesting time for baseball cards. eBay wasn't the thing yet. eBay actually originated in 1995, became more of a baseball card thing later than that. As a kid, I was able to mail off orders from a mimeographed sheet that got distributed. There was a guy named Jim Elder. I still remember this guy's name. A couple of guys in the neighborhood figured out this guy. I think he was advertising in the back of the Sporting News or something. And we would get mimeographed lists of probably just crap from his basement that he was getting rid of. But he would have, individual cards listed, $1.50 for this card, $10 for this card, whatever. And that's when, I was 9 or 10, I was making more than $1 a week then. Maybe $3 a week. Now I had paper routes, so I was making some money. And of course, that would go to somewhere in Florida where Jim Elder lived and bought a bunch of old cards. Of course, those all got sold when I went to college, but it was kind of a predecessor to the 90s for me. The 90s, there were a couple places like that. It wasn't mimeographed anymore. It was actual, printed stuff you could get in the mail. But also, it was the advent of the baseball card store. They were everywhere. There was one called Mom's Sports Cards in Hickory, North Carolina. It was amazing. I remember walking in there one day. We were actually next door at Olin Mills getting some family photos done. And I came in and I saw cards like this. 56 Koufax. I mentioned I love 56 before. Look at that card. It's amazing. 56 Whitey Ford. Still have these to this day. I bought these at Mom's Sports Cards in the early 90s. I also had a 1956 Ted Williams that I was holding when I told some of my workers that I was going to have my first child. That card was stolen later, and that started the era number 3 of my sports card collecting, and we'll talk about that later. Anyway, there were sports cards shops everywhere. In fact, I started at this point, after having this fun with the 91 collecting packs, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to get all the cards back from my childhood. But I didn't want to just go buy, I'm not sure I could at that time, a 1971 set, because they were going for 4 figures at that time. But there were some like starter sets. And said, hey, we'll sell you a bunch of stuff, no stars in it, or some partial set. So I was able to get some of those for 71 and 73. I went for 72 last because, as we covered earlier, I hated 72. But anyway, I was going to recover all these cards. And I was going to baseball card shops all over the place. Atlanta, Greenville, South Carolina. Actually, one time when we were in San Francisco, when I was working on the 72 set, I was having a hard time finding 2 or 3 of the 72 common cards. And I was digging through a place in Berkeley, California, and found 2 or 3 of the 1972 cards I needed. Anyway, it was cool at that time. You could walk in a store and say, look at this. I need a 56 Sandy Koufax. The reason I said 73 is I was trying to finish the 73 set. One of the last ones I needed was a 73 Nolan Ryan. Walked into a place in Atlanta. He had a 73 Nolan Ryan there. He even asked me, how'd you know to come here for a 73 Nolan Ryan? It's like, hey, it's a baseball card shop. It's what you do, right? So anyway, that's how the second era started. And it was cool. You could go get baseball cards. In a way, in this age, it's sort of like breweries. Hang with me here. I am not a fan of IPAs. I know a lot of people are. IPAs are a very bitter beer, and they are very trendy, and most breweries have a lot of IPAs. That has made breweries extremely popular. There's breweries all over the place, and I love it. I go to breweries. I enjoy going to a brewery. I don't get an IPA when I go to a brewery, and I acknowledge that this brewery boom is because IPAs are popular. So I don't bitch about IPAs too much because I still can drink my non-IPA beer at these breweries that IPAs make possible. So what was really making baseball card shops possible in the 90s was this plethora of sets. So when Upper Deck burst the bubble of Topps in '89, all kinds of companies started making baseball cards. You had Upper Deck, you still had Topps, you had Fleer, you had Bowman, you had more. I don't even care, Donruss. Um, all these companies. Not only did each of them have a set, in '92, Topps, I guess, worried that they were, getting horned in on, decided, you know what, we're going to have a premium set now. So they had a premium set called Stadium Club. Then every other company said, you know what, that's a pretty good idea. We're going to have 2 or 3 sets ourselves. So by '94 or '95, there were like 20 sets to choose from. And it's like, well, do you really want 20 sets? I didn't. Didn't care. Didn't care about Donruss. Didn't care about Fleer. Whatever. But because of all that stuff that I didn't care about, plus rookie cards that I still don't agree with, but just because it was a rookie card of somebody nobody ever heard of and may never do anything with their life, Brian Taylor, for example, their cards were going for more than an established star. 3 or 4 times more. Didn't make any sense. Anyway, because of all that nonsense, baseball cards existed. So I tried not to complain about it too much because I was able to walk into a baseball card shop in just about any city and say, I need some 1973 common cards. I'm going to go back here and dig into the commons and see if I can find the cards I need. It was a glorious age for collectors. And now we come to the harbinger of good and bad things that come from this. So I remember the logic I went through based on my experience as a kid. So in, I don't know, early '70s sometimes, Dave Hebier, the person that I just want to be my enemy and I just can't make it, he's just too good of a guy. His uncle gave him a cigar box of baseball cards when we were a kid. And they were from the '50s, primarily the '50s. And in early '70s, that was a 10-year-old card or 15-year-old card. Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, not a big deal. But then it was like, wow, these are cards from the '50s. It's before I was born. Woo! And then later, 10 or 15 years later, they were really amazingly rare. And anyway. So my logic in '89 or so when Upper Deck came up with their set was, well, you know what? If I buy one of these and hold on to it for 15 years, it'll be amazing. It'll be like, wow, a 1989 Upper Deck set. That's the first year they did them. Well, guess what? All this crap they did in the '90s, they made so many baseball cards. None of that stuff is worth anything now. You are more likely to get value out of your cards from the '90s using them to go camping for kindling. Well, I fear for breweries now because I feel like at some point someone's going to get tired of IPAs and it's all going to go and all the breweries are going to die. That's what happened to baseball card shops. You might say it's because of eBay rising in popularity. Maybe true, maybe not. But in general, the popularity of rookie cards and just the total non-scarcity of baseball cards made baseball card shops pretty much useless. It's a sad story, really. I would be remiss if I left the 1990s without talking a little more about actual baseball. The '90s and even the '80s, there was a lot of off the field issues with baseball, and baseball struggled. They had strikes, and one of the things that came up that really stuck with me was baseball is a national pastime, but it's a local game. The possibility of seeing your team is very important. As I mentioned, the Cubs, I couldn't get WGN anymore. I became a Braves fan. That was a nice trade-off. I was able to at least see the Braves every day. But the ability to see your team often is a big deal. Now, of course, I appreciate other players. Today, Mike Trout, fantastic guy. Several players that aren't Cubs or Braves I'm aware of and enjoy watching. But the true attachment, my tethering to the sport, is with my team. And I'm sure that's true of other people with their teams as well. Another important thing is their sportscaster or their broadcaster. A good commentator, if you want to use that word, is very important for the long haul of a baseball season and can make the storytelling just compelling. So 89 with the Cubs was okay. Harry Carey, I know he was great as far as being a cheerleader. Not a very good play-by-play guy at all. Steve Stone was very good, but the Braves have been very blessed, even though they had a 90s great baseball team. They also had a great broadcasting team in the 80s and 90s and beyond that made it a joy to listen to baseball games. So the 80s, the Braves were not very good. Didn't stop me from listening or watching Braves games. Skip Carey was my favorite. All four of the broadcasters were very, very good. Skip was the best. So, for example, Turner Broadcasting owned the Braves. Turner was a very sensitive with his CNN ownership as well to how the Braves represented themselves on the air. So Skip was pretty famous for doing things like saying, it's 13-1. You might want to go ahead and walk the dog and come on back, which happened fairly often. He'd get in trouble for that because, then the advertisers are losing out there. So that wasn't good. Or when things would dust up at home plate, he was not allowed to say foreign because CNN didn't want you saying foreign. So if a batter got dust in his eye, he'd have to say, he'd go out of his way to say, there's an international object in Otis Nixon's eye or whoever. So that was Skip. My single favorite story is, there's two of them. One, there was a Braves game in the early, or I guess mid 80s. It wouldn't end. The game wouldn't end. And finally it was like 15, 16 innings, and I'll edit and show you details later perhaps, but it got to like the bottom of the 15th inning and it seemed like it was finally going to end. Braves were losing by 3. Their pitcher, who couldn't hit where the flip was up, was like, all right, finally, this is over. Rick Camp hits a 3-run homer, and everyone's like, oh no! And it went on and on, and Skip always referred to that game as the 5-3 game. And it wasn't that the score was 5-3. That's when he got home, and his wife just gave him crap for it. She was like, "You weren't at a baseball game until 5-3." Anyway, so there was that. The other thing is, before a game got started, one time there was a lady right before the game started. First pitch was about to happen, but as cameramen tend to do, and this isn't well advertised but pretty well known, caught a very nice looking lady going to her seat. She was holding something from the concession stand, but her halter top was having a very difficult time halting the things that was supposed to halt, if you get my drift there. And they just watched and watched this girl walk to her seat, and finally Skip broke in and said, well, we almost had 2 out and the game hasn't even started yet. That was Skip Carey. Joy to listen to. And not only was he funny, but the play-by-play of every game of him and that whole sportscasting team was very, very, very good. Broadcasters, some of them are famous. There is a Hall of Fame wing just for broadcasters. I've been able to appreciate Vin Scully. Karen and I went to a Dodgers game not long ago. Vin was still doing a few games back then. And we were at the game, and I'm noticing all these people with earbuds in. I'm like, you're at a baseball game. Why are you listening to your iPod or whatever you're listening to? And then I realized, you're listening to Vin Scully while you're at the game. That's how big deal it is. There's Mel Allen. There's many, many famous broadcasters. Today, there are still good broadcasters. Pat Hughes for the Cubs, fantastic to listen to. I will turn off the sound sometime. All of the Cubs TV play-by-play guys are very good as well still today. But if it's a national game and I don't like the broadcaster, I can find a way to get Pat Hughes on because he's very good. And all the radio guys are pretty good. So, local game. The other thing about the local game is it's a 162 game season. So the Braves, yeah, they only made it to the playoffs 13 years in a row or something like that, but they only won one World Series. The joy isn't just the World Series, and I don't know if I can, get that across here. It's very hard to just kind of tell someone who doesn't get into baseball what it is, but maybe, for example, Marvel might be a good example. So there was, the Avengers Endgame came out not long ago, 4-hour movie. So you could say, oh, you know what? I'll go see Avengers Endgame. Well, you know what? There's dozens, well, not dozens, but over a dozen other great movies that led up to that movie. And yeah, you could just not see them and watch Endgame, but it wouldn't be the same. You need to see at least some of Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Thor Ragnarok, even some of the Spider-Man, Ant-Man, all this kind of stuff. All of that brings the flavor into the gumbo that is Avengers Endgame. And then, people are like, oh, well, it's 4 hours. Maybe it should be 1 hour or 30 minutes. I want to get it over with quick. If it's good, make it 4 hours. Make it 2 4-hour movies. If it's good, I don't understand that complaint. So if you're not into Marvel, that probably doesn't help you any. But the regular season, trying to see, like in '89, if the Cubs can even get to first. Once they get to first, can they hang on to first? Every day you're watching a ball game. Not only is the ball game itself enjoyable, especially if you have a good person describing it to you, but the tension in that game, especially as you get later in the year, is, are they going to be able to hold on? Or are they going to be able to get there? It is a wonderful thing. So those who complain about the regular season, I would also say then just don't go see Iron Man or any of the other, Captain Americas or anything like that from Marvel. You don't need that either to see Endgame. So let me give you a couple of specifics. 1992, Braves. 91, as I mentioned a little earlier, Braves went from worst to first, made it to the World Series that year. Yay! 92, honestly, I wouldn't tell anyone this, but yeah, 91 was probably a fluke. So they did manage to take their division that year. I was like, oh, cool. And I was like, well, I don't know if they're going to make the World Series 2 years in a row. These guys, I'm not really sure. And my first wife, TC, was still a fledgling baseball fan at that time. And we were watching the playoffs. So NLCS, National League Championship Series, which was the only round of playoffs before the World Series then, they were playing the Pirates. And after this long season of just having just intense feelings of can they make it, can they make it, can they make it, this is a slight release of, all right, they made it to the playoffs. And then, oh, can they get there, can they get there, can they get there? And they get to the deciding game of the League Championship Series against the Pirates. And it's middle of the game, and it's not looking good for the Braves. And TC is just so disgusted that she just stops watching. She left the room, and I just spent many depressing innings watching the game. And it gets to the 9th inning, and the Braves are up, and it's bottom of the 9th, down by 3. Not a lot of hope. Pretty much their whole bench has been depleted. They eke out a run somehow. They got a guy on second, they got a guy on third, and Francisco Cabrera, their third string catcher, is all they've got left on the bench. They bring him up, and he comes to bat. Pinch hitting. Cabrera miraculously hits a ball between the shortstop and the third baseman. So remember, the Braves are still down a run. I guess they had eked out 2 runs before that. Anyway, guy from third scores. The guy on second is Sid Breen, recognized by many as one of the slowest men in the history of baseball. And he just chugs from second and keeps going. Barry Bonds throws to the plate. Yes, Barry Bonds of the Pirates throws to the plate. It's up the line. Sid Bream, again, one of the slowest men in the history of baseball, scores the winning run. It was pandemonium. A single game, that is the most memorable game for me. Single game ever for me as a baseball fan, as a Braves fan. It was fantastic. Another aside for that, and by the way, that was not the World Series. They didn't even make it to the World. Well, I'm sorry, they made it to the World Series and lost. But that's what I remember. Sid Bream later was invited to maybe throw a first pitch for a later playoff game for the Braves. He had been traded from the Pirates to the Braves not long before all that happened. But when it looked like the Braves might play the Pirates in the game that he was invited to, he declined the invitation because he didn't want to rub it in to the Pittsburgh fans. Yeah, baseball guys. All right, the other thing to mention is the next year, 1993. The Giants took off like gangbusters that year, and the regular season was crazy. So the Braves, it's like, all right, well, we finally are getting somewhere. We've made it almost to the promised land 2 years in a row now, not thinking it's so much of a fluke anymore. Mid-season, they really raised the ante and they get Fred McGriff, who was amazing. He just literally lit the fire his first game there. Part of the stadium caught fire and they had to delay the game. I wound up missing most of that game, and he hit 2 homers that day. So the Braves just were obviously committed. They went and got Fred McGriff, and they were way behind at that time. I believe it was July. Again, I can edit and maybe throw some of that in later. But anyway, they eked and eked and eked towards the Giants all year long. But the Giants had, when you got to the end of the season, 103 wins. It was hard to catch a team winning 103 games. But as every night, again, this has to do with the regular season. Every night you watch the Braves. It's like, the Braves won. Yes. Can they catch the Giants? Well, the Giants are on the West Coast. You have to wait and see. All right, did the Giants win? Yes, the Giants won too. Damn it, we cannot catch these guys. Day after day after day, the intensity is fantastic. And finally, the last game of the season, the Braves win. The Giants lose. Many people say this is the last great pennant race because the next year they changed to the wild card format. And it wouldn't be the case anymore where the Giants would lose 103 games or win 103 games and go home without going to the playoffs. So that's what I remember. I remember Sid Bream's slide, and I remember that intense regular season every day trying to catch the Giants every single day. I remember that more than the Braves winning the 1995 World Series, which also was freaking awesome, but not the thing I remember the most. It's the regular season and the dramatic slide to get to the World Series is what's memorable to me for the Braves. So next I will talk about era 3 of my sports card collecting life after the turn of the century into the 2000s.